Hi everyone, it's Todd with Olsen Motorsports. Today we are talking about oil lines to turbochargers, specifically for a 993 turbo. This is the stock line that comes off the car that I actually just took off the car. Goes from the engine case here to the oil housing at the bottom side of the turbocharger, and it fits orientated just like this. Okay, so we see it goes straight across and then down. So what tends to happen is oil will drain from the case down to the turbocharger housing, fill up because it's below, it'll fill up to this level, and it will eventually go into the turbocharger if the seals are bad or weak, and then start coming out of the turbocharger. And we've had several cars recently that are sitting that are having this issue. So the fix for that is that we're making custom oil lines that start and finish at the same exact place, but they have a, so to speak, a P-trap, or similar to that, where it's actually gonna go uphill from the engine case so that oil can't go up past this point and then drain down. It will stop somewhere in this area, and it will prevent oil from leaking over time when the car's sitting back down through the turbocharger. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make a fresh line of this one, of the updated version with the P-trap, to replace the factory oil line. So we're gonna bend the line with all of our tools, and then we're gonna cut the fittings off of this factory line and put them onto the new line that we're gonna make right now. So I already have a template made that I'm gonna just basically copy, and we're gonna make a couple sets of these so we have some here. So right now that's what we're doing. We're gonna start with some 10 mil high strength aluminum hose line that we just ordered in big 6-foot sections, so I'm cutting them in half. So we have a 3-foot section here. That's gonna give us a little extra room on the ends, so when we can pop the fittings on and then make our flares and cut them to the right length. We are using a Imperial line bender that will work. It's a standard size bender, but 3/8 and 10 mil are almost the same, so we're gonna be using that. This has a really tight radius that we can bend, as opposed to some of them that have a wider angle. And then we're gonna be using our what's left of our hydraulic flare tool. So this is gonna have the receptacle for the line to fit into and lock in. It's got a bubble flare tool that's gonna go in here, which I'm gonna explain all of this as we get going and making these lines. We're gonna be using a reamer, and we're gonna be using a pipe cutter at the end to cut our fittings off. So we also have a Sharpie handy. If you smoke, you can have your jewel pod available. That would work as well. So what we're gonna do now, since I've already cut this, for those of you that have not made lines, this is going rough already. Edit that part out, yeah. So when you cut the line with your pipe cutter here, it's gonna leave a rough edge in the center, and that is gonna affect our bubble flare when we get to that point. So what we do is we take our reamer tool, which should come with your flare kit, and we're gonna ream out that center piece. And we're gonna get it nice and smooth so that when we go to fit our bubble flare fitting in there, it slides right in and we have no binding or grinding, anything of that nature. So everybody has a way that they like to bend their pipes. I tend to just mimic it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mark, we're gonna leave a little extra length at the end here, about 1 inch, where we're gonna leave blank because we need to have room for our fittings. So I'm gonna mark where I want my first bend to be, which is gonna be a tiny little bend here, which I don't need to shadow with the stock line on this one, because I'm just gonna put it in here right on my mark. And I'm just gonna give it a tiny little boop, right? Just a little bend. And that's gonna start us off so we can see we're very similar in bends here, right? Okay, so now what I do is when you're bending with this bending tool, you're always curving down, okay? So for example, with this next bend, it's gonna curve down. So the easiest way to do this is to see where your first bend is orientated, which is facing up from the 90 that I'm gonna make right now. And I'm gonna eyeball it, and I'm gonna put that in here, right? So I have the bends up like this, very similar. Now I need to see where my bend needs to be, so I need to get this point here in line with the beginning of the bending tool. This is a little bit hard to explain verbally because it's kind of just something you either know how to do or you don't. So I'm gonna try to do my best to explain what I'm doing, but then I'm gonna just whip through this so we can get these lines made because we need to flat rate this job. So now. Okay, I'm pretty close to my bend where I want it to be. So now I'm gonna double check that when I come straight down off this 90, that this first bend is slightly oblonged. So you can see how it angles at an angle to the right when I'm at my 90 here. So I'm gonna try to shadow that and make sure that those are pretty well in line with each other, which they look to be right now. And then, so this is a little less than 90 from where I'm gonna bend. So I'm gonna bend this to about 75 degrees and then we're gonna double check it, okay? So on my flaring tool, you can see I have angles here that start from 0 and go all the way to 180, which would be obviously a full circle or half a circle, but whoops. So right now, I'm just gonna take my bend to about 75, 78, something like that, right? And we're gonna pull that back. So now you can see I made that bend and we're gonna double check where we're at. So we're pretty close. I'm a little bit off on lengthwise, but that's okay because we can account for that. So we're pretty close there. Angles are good, bends are good. We can see that these turn sort of the same way. So now we're gonna go with that. We're gonna go to our next bend, okay? So now we have these good. So we're gonna go here. We're gonna do 2 little bends straight on from the 90. So what we'll do is we'll fit our pipe back in here like this, straight on with the 90 or 78, whatever that is. And then we're gonna hold this again and shadow it. So now you can see my bend is going up from where I'm holding it. So the answer to that is I need to swing this opposite, right? And then when we mimic it now, the bend's gonna be coming down because as I bring the arm down, it's gonna bend downwards. So we're too far out. So we need to make that a little bit longer. And again, this is kind of something you need to practice a little bit. I'm still learning. Every time I do this, I learn a little trick to make it a little faster or a little easier or make a little more sense in my head. It's kind of a doing thing. You kind of have to do it if you want to get good at it. You just got to practice. Just get a big roll of line and start bending away. So we're just going to do another little small bend there, right? Let's check our angle. We're going to hold them up next to each other. And here, I'll hold it like this so you can see. So we're pretty close on that. Pretty good angle there. We can maybe go a hair further. It looks a little bit shallow. So we'll just go a hair more. Okay, and then we got one more little bend that we're going to do right after that one. As you can see, there's a second bend right here. So we're going to line that up there, which that looks pretty good right where it's at. We're going to give it, I'm going to give it a little hair back. And we're going to give it another tiny little boop. All right, so it's looking good. Let's see where we're at here. This is awkward when I can't see what I'm doing. All right, we're looking pretty good there. All right, so we got one more bend to make. So we're gonna scoot this back and then we're gonna go for this last 78-ish bend. So now we're gonna be bending down so you can see where my line is facing. So I'm gonna rotate this around here and we're gonna hover over again and see where we're at. So I'm way too far out. So I'm gonna back this off a little bit. I need another hand. Anybody knows where I can order an extra hand, an extra arm? That'd be great. I would like to have one. All right. So we're close, still a little far out. Okay. So we're looking good there. So we got our angle right. We got our location pretty good. Now we're gonna do our bend. We're gonna do again about 78 degrees-ish. Niner. All right, so let's check here where we're at. It's looking pretty good there. It's Pretty close. We need a little bit more. You can see this line's a little sharper and comes down below where the plane of this line is. So I'm gonna give it just a hair more. And we're good. Okay, so bending should be complete. Okay, so we're gonna put this bender out of the way. We're gonna put this other line out of the way. Pretty close. Got a little angle issue here, which we can just do by hand. We can just tweak it a tiny bit. Okay, so now you can see, obviously I told you before I left these long because we're gonna cut these a little longer because we need to allow room for our bubble flare. Now keep in mind, it's gonna push the metal down and form this bubble flare. So if you cut it at exact length to this and then you flare it, it's gonna actually end up being a couple millimeters short. So we're pretty proper here on this. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna start our flaring process. So what I do is I take my pen and I mark the exact length of where the fittings end, where these bubble flares are, right? And then all I'm gonna do, so I'll make that go out here. All I'm gonna do is add like 2 mil, like that, right? So here's my mark here. I'm gonna add like 2 or 3 mil, just eyeballing it. Okay, so I'm gonna go to those upper marks. So now we are going to cut this pipe to the length we want it at, right? So if you've never used a pipe cutter, you're gonna set the rollers on one side, you're gonna set the blade on the other side, and we're gonna tighten it down pretty good, right? And then, there's 2 ways you can do this, obviously, if you've never done it. You can spin this, right? Or you can spin the line, which depends. If you have a straight piece of line, you're gonna wanna grip that line with all your might with one hand and spin the cutter on the other side. But when you already have bends in it, it gives you a good gripping point. I choose to spin the line and just hold the cutter. And then once it gets really easy to move, right, you're gonna need to tighten it down again to press that cutting blade back in again. And then eventually it's gonna go through and we're gonna have a little rough edge there. We take our reamer tool again, give it a couple little good little reams there. Okay, now we have a proper end that is ready to accept the bubble flaring tool, right? Which is gonna go right. Okay, well, see, I didn't ream it enough. And that's a good point there to show you that when you cut it, it's gonna bend in that inside edge and the tool won't fit. So now we're good. Fits right in there nice and easy for our bubble tool, right? Okay, so now we're gonna go here to our upper mark. Same thing. We're going to attach the cutting tool in between the 2 rollers and get the blade right on our mark. And we're gonna spin until it gets very loose, like this. I can move it by hand now, tighten it down. Now it's real tight, and we're gonna spin again. And I'm doing this weird because I'm just trying to move fast, but. Okay, we don't need that anyway, so we're just gonna leave that on the floor for now. Keith's behind the camera giving me the big owl eyes over there. All right, okay, so we're good now. We can test our bubble flare tool again. Fits right in there, we're good to go. Okay, so we're gonna take our original line that we mocked up and we're gonna put that to the side. So now I'm in need of fittings. These fittings are extremely hard to find in the right sizes. So I'm taking the factory lines that we are no longer using and I'm gonna cut these ends off. These are a little bit stiffer of a metal than what we're using. Not sure what the makeup is from Stuttgart, but we're gonna cut these off so we can get the fittings. Now, when you make lines, brake lines, fuel lines, whatever, I've done it. I've been working on cars for almost 17 years. I have made the most beautiful flare on the end of a line without a fitting, and then you're starting over from scratch because if you cut the flare off, now your line's too short and you won't have the clearance to make it to where you're trying to go. So make sure before you put your flaring tool on there, whatever you're using, that your fitting is on there. facing the right direction, or you're starting over on the line altogether. So, and that's that. Got the end off. I am not reaming this because this is going away. There's one. Obviously we need both. Oh, no wonder. Okay, well, sometimes your flaring tool or your cutting tool breaks in the middle of cutting stuff, and the little screw that holds the cutting blade comes out. And when that happens, you might not be really cutting, even though you're working really hard at it, which is what just happened to me. So learn from my idiocy, whatever the word is. I'm a lip licker, so this is what happens. Okay. Tim, don't watch the rest of this video. Okay, I think we're actually cutting now and not just pretending to cut. Oh, look at that. Okay. Fitting number 2. This is garbage. So we have our fittings now. We'll move on to the flaring part. So I'm not going to get into the great details of this flaring tool. It's a really cool hydraulic flaring kit. It's made by Mastercool. It's a universal hydraulic flaring kit. You could do bubble, you could do double, you could do regular flares. You can even do GM fuel line forming. It's a really cool tool. It works great. It's a lot better than those hand tools. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put a bubble flare on the end of this with our fitting on there. Now make sure you orientate the fitting the proper way, because you do not want to put it on backwards on accident, because like I said before, if you do that, you're starting over from scratch, because you got to cut the fitting back off because it can't get past any of these bends here. So you can't slide it off the other way. You're going to end up having to make the whole new line. So what you do with this tool is we have our blocks and our bubble flare piece all set up. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to get this line into these blocks, which are going to be inside the tool, and you need to get them flush with the end of the block. So it should be pretty close to flush with that, right? So you can all see that. So we don't want it to be deep down in there, and we don't want it to be too far out where it's sticking out like this out of the end. We essentially want to eyeball it and get it pretty even with the plane of the front end of these blocks. Okay, so then we're going to put that in our tool here. I like to do this on the edge of the table so you can spin this. Okay, so we're going to lock this block in there pretty tight, and now we can see it's in there and it's flush with the blocks, and now we have our proper sized bubble flaring tool here that inserts in. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to get that bubble flare tool to insert into the end of the line. Okay, all the way by hand until it stops, which is right there. We're going to tighten our hydraulic valve. Okay, and we're going to give it a couple good presses. And as you can see, I'll hold this steady. It's going to push this arm up using the hydraulic pump into the block, and it's going to bubble flare our fitting for us. It might be hard to see, but it's actually pushing it up in there. So now it's getting really tight. I'm going to give it one good push, and then we're going to release the pressure. And then we're going to manually remove the bubble flare tool from the line. Then we're going to untighten the block that's in there. Now with this tool, the block has ribs in it to hold the line, so it's going to be on there pretty good, and it's going to be stuck to the line because that's what holds it in place. So for me, this is all solid metal. Give it a little bang on the table, good to go. We have our line flared with our fitting as a bubble flare, and as you can see, it fits really nice into the end of the fitting. Nice and smooth, good. It's a proper flare, and you can't really mess these up with this tool, which is the beauty of it, because anyone that's bent any kind of amount of lines has done a bubble flare when you get everything perfect and it goes off to one side and then you're remaking the line again. So this kind of takes out some of the, kind of idiot proofs it, which for me is a really nice thing to have in my corner. Okay, so second side, we have our fitting on there facing the right way. We have cleaned up our end already because we know it's going to fit into the tool. Okay, so we're going to get this lined up in here, and we're going to tighten our tool, tighten the block into the tool. As you can see, again, we have our line mounted in our block. It's tight, it's flush with the bottom end of the block here on the plane. So now we're going to do the same process again, and we're going to get our bubble flare tool inserted into the end of this line, which I'm going to do manually by hand right here. Okay, until it stops. Okay, stopped. Tighten our hydraulic valve, and now we're going to go up with the flare tool. Okay, got nice and tight, so we're good. We're going to release hydraulic pressure. We're going to unthread our tool. We're going to loosen our block, pull it out, and tap it off. So here we go. Line is done. Okay, so as you can see, I'll show you again. We have our updated line, which we just made. As you can see, they're very similar. They should be almost identical, right? So the fittings are slightly different because they're from different cars. So one's a little deeper. You'll notice that. But our lines themselves, they pretty much shadow each other, which is what we were looking for, because now this should be an easy bolt-on application back to the vehicle. We have our old line here. As you can see, there's a pretty substantial difference in the two. This extra bend up here is what's going to prevent the oil from leaking back down into the turbo oil housing. So that pretty much sums up. That was very quick. If you have questions, give us an email, make a comment, give us a shout at the workshop. We'd be happy to help if you have questions. If you need these lines made for your car, specifically a 993 turbo, give us a holler. We can gladly make these for you. And check us out on social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube especially. Check out our website, Olsen Motorsports. Thanks for tuning in today, and we'll check you next time. All right, what are we doing? Where's all my stuff? Where's the, oh. I've done that before, dude. You make this perfect line, get it perfect tits, right? And then you go, where's my fitting? Oh yeah, I forgot to put that on there. And now what we're gonna do is we are gonna double check. Did I just put the wrong line away? Okay, there we go.